Creative Assembly have indicated that we can look forward to a siege rework as part of Warhammer 3, and that we will soon receive information on what that will entail. This is an area that many fans are eager to see revealed, and an area that I feel Creative Assembly cannot afford to mess up. Sieges, as we all know, are a huge part of the game. So what changes might CA have in store? Well, I can't answer that, I'm afraid, but I can put out there some aspects that I'd like to see implemented or improved upon. Perhaps the most important aspect of sieges that needs attention is the AI, how it defends its settlements, and the tactics, or lack thereof, during sieges. Looking at how the AI defends the walls is a prime example of where there needs to be changes. The AI will often keep units in place on the wall that are being wiped out, only moving them out of harm's way when their numbers are very low. And often when the unit does move, the AI will replace it with a new unit that is also enabled to defend themselves from ranged attacks, and much like that first unit, will just sit there, taking casualties. The AI needs to learn to either withdraw the units to a safe distance, choosing to make their stand deeper in the settlement, or bring a ranged unit up to fire on the attackers, or perhaps even sally forth out of the settlement with a fast-moving unit to drive the attackers away. A cheap and dirty alternative would be to give those on the battlements increased resistances against missile fire, or to decrease the accuracy of the attacking ranged units when they are firing upward. These measures would help alleviate the issue, but not fix it. Another issue with the AI and sieges is retreating. All too often units, both the players and the AIs, will retreat in the wrong direction. Now what do I mean by this? Well, defenders will often run out of the gates and flee across the lands in front of the walls, running through numerous enemy units. Perhaps more annoying is when attackers flee the battlefield by running deeper into the settlement. This is extra frustrating when you are defending, and the fleeing AI units rally at the last moment and are then able to attack your forces from behind. One of the stupidest AI behaviors in the game for me. Now, how difficult can it be to ensure the AI flees back toward their own deployment area? Surely it can't be that hard. Another issue related to the AI, though not limited to sieges, is the AI wasting all their ammo firing at targets they have very little chance of killing. Could we give ranged units some more smarts, where they calculate the odds of hitting and wounding a target and don't bother if they can't harm them? I think I saw something like this in some Three Kingdoms footage, though I'm not certain, but if Three Kingdoms does have that ability, can we please port it over? One of the things I remember really enjoying with Medieval 2 was multiple level sieges. I would often defend the outer walls with part of my force, then fall back in stages to the inner keep, providing cover to the infantry as they join my main force. I missed that ability. As the Warhammer siege maps have been so limited in scope, with just a single wall with one or two faces, it feels quite restricted. To have maps with multiple walls or keeps, and different elevations which allow for tiered defences, would make the battles far more interesting. We can see from the Everest battle added in the Warden and the Paunch, and from the Empire Fort layout, that elevation can make a map more interesting to defend, and that the elevation is a godsend for the use of artillery, which otherwise doesn't play much of a role. This of course brings us on to the point of artillery on the walls, something that we have seen in cinematics and which has been achieved in previous Total War games, yet somehow isn't in Warhammer. In the second trailer for Grand Cathay, it was disappointing to see the artillery outside of the settlement. Now sure, this may have been for artistic purposes, but I have a feeling that the game still does not support artillery units on the walls, and this would be a real shame. If there is some insurmountable technical issue preventing this, then it would only increase the need for multiple elevations and settlements to somewhat compensate. As part of the tiered defences, we could also have towers within the settlement, at the second layer of walls, or at critical junctions throughout the settlement. These towers would be upgraded in a similar manner as to those on the outer walls, though their main difference would be their ability to fire in a 360-degree arc. As the sieges stand, we have two major points of interaction when fighting: the walls and the town square. The walls often end up being abandoned by the player when defending, as it's more efficient to make a stand around the town square. The player can use choke points to their advantage in a way the AI is just not capable of, and this makes for rather predictable and repetitive battles. One way to bring the player back to the walls would be to have multiple capture points in the settlement and have the walls themselves be included. Instead of the single point that the armies are fighting over, we would have points stretched across the map, each worth a percentage of the total. The player would still have the choice to abandon the walls, but it would make it easier for the AI to capture the settlement, as they would need only 1 or 2 additional points. By defending the walls, or perhaps certain positions that are tactically important upon the walls, then the player has access to more capture points, and a better chance of driving off the attackers. The capture points could even be incorporated into the campaign, with defensive upgrades that add additional points, or fortifications around points to aid in their defense. The variety of the maps in games 1 and 2 is quite disappointing, especially when you are fighting in faction capitals or famous fortresses. It feels like every map is a clone, with little variety between settlements that were built by completely different races. Game 2 improved on this somewhat with some of the settlements in Lustria, but it still feels like I'm fighting the same battle over and over again. This needs some major improvement going forward. The GCCM mod has added some amazing maps to the game. It's just a shame that the AI has trouble with many of them. Perhaps Creative Assembly could take some of the more promising map designs and begin to incorporate them into the game with improved AI and pathing behavior. Creative Assembly could also start to include 1 or 2 new siege maps for famous settlements with each new patch, bringing us a true representation of Altdorf, or Karazakorak, or Hellpit. In addition, there also needs to be some way to differentiate between different faction settlements other than the artwork and the missiles fired from towers. What if each faction has access to unique defenses that could be built up through the campaign? The Empire might have some form of boiling oil that can be prepared and dropped on attackers from the walls. The Lizardmen could have traps that fire poison darts at enemies as they cross certain thresholds on the map. The Vampire Counts could have graveyards that sprout forth zombies or skeletons from the ground as the attackers pass by. These features could be additional defensive buildings the player chooses on the campaign, and during the deployment phase they could get to position them in areas where they think their defenses are vulnerable. Warhammer is a grand fantasy with huge armies and bigger-than-life characters, and games 1 and 2 do a good job of representing that scope. However, when it comes to the battle maps, especially those in sieges, that scope can become awfully constricted. So many of the maps feel incredibly tight and restrictive. I find it odd that these huge important cities in the lore can be represented by a wall and a few streets in-game. Now I realise that there are certain limitations to the engine, but surely the scope of the maps can be improved. Give us larger maps with multiple approaches. Give us maps with certain terrain features, like chasms or rivers, that are part of the siege layout. Take some of that wonderful artwork we see in the background and bring it into the playable area. Siege towers and battering rams are great and all, but I find that they are not really worth it when my infantry can pull out their magic ladders and scale the walls without any preparation. I think the use of ladders needs to be limited. Perhaps the player has to spend time building them in the same manner as siege towers, or their use is restricted to fewer areas of the walls, with those units taking more damage from the defenders as they reach the top. Another thing that seems to be lacking are faction-specific abilities during assaults. There are so many wonderful units in Warhammer that could have unique interactions with the walls that could add more variety and fun to sieges. There is the obvious need for ethereal units to have the ability to phase through walls. If this is considered overpowered, then have their stats reduced for a short period afterwards, or give the defender the ability to deploy magical wards that prevent ethereal units from passing through. Spiders are another case. It would be wonderful to see goblin spider riders being able to scurry up the walls. Or how about units digging under them? Sappers could destroy them. Could we see flame units have the ability to set towers alight, or perhaps even weaken the walls from their flames? There are so many possibilities that could be explored. There is so much that can be done with sieges, and so much that needs to be done. I believe Creative Assembly has the ability to improve sieges, and to take them to the next level, making them the best in the franchise. I just hope that they have put in the effort to do so. And what is your wish list for sieges? Do you even care much if they are changed? Now, time to announce the results of the community Guess Who post from the week before last. For those unfamiliar, I post a series of images of characters or units from Warhammer 2 in silhouette, and the community can choose to test their knowledge. Those who figure out who or what the images are get a shout out in the video the following Monday. So, to the results. Our first image comes from the Dowie Air Force, with the Gyro Bomber. Second is the Witch Hunter from the Empire. And last is Crone Hellebron out for a stroll. Well done to Chessmaster665, Kim Jong-un, Satiris Gunaris, and Tyrion Lamperouge. Hopefully I didn't butcher anyone's name too badly. This video was brought to you with the aid of my patrons. I'd like to thank Hot Apple Pie, Alexander, and Solarith Magnetar. I'm Grey Tiger, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.